Welcome to the Intentional Guy Podcast, where we are driven to help men become more intentional and purposeful in their daily lives. Your host, Michael Chestnut, will interview amazing guests to get insight and glean wisdom from, so we can integrate intentional living and lead happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. All right, let's get started with the show.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Intentional Guy. It's so great to have you with us again today. So this week, we are going to focus on marriage. And I am a big component of let's be more intentional in our walk, but especially as husbands, let's be intentional in our walk with our wives. And I am one of those guys big for sticking my foot in my mouth all the time. So today, we have with us special guests, Doug and Leslie Davis. Thank you for joining us. The vision-driven marriage. I love that right there. But I would love for you guys to introduce yourself to us today. And one of the things we were talking about was the 6 marriage mistakes you make as soon as you open your mouth, which is me.
Right. I think it's a lot of us.
You know, and I've had to. And you know what? Some of it is out of nervousness. And for me, not feeling like I was worthy enough or smart enough to lead my family, you know? And so a lot of humor, I would use humor and stuff to be a buffer, but that humor was speaking stuff over my wife that wasn't really kind, you know? And so when I changed that, I saw how she looked at me differently, and I loved it. You know, so, but anyways, they've heard me talk plenty. So let's talk to you guys. If you would introduce yourself to us.
We are Doug and Leslie Davis. I've been the pastor at the Arthur Southern Baptist Church for the last 17 years, and by God's grace, have had the opportunity to do a lot of premarital counseling. And my wife Leslie is a counselor at our church. And she does a lot of not only help with people before they're married, but then after as well. And so she's been doing that for how many years now? 12, I believe.
Since 2008.
So, so a little over that. And so we've had the opportunity to share some things. And at first we had a real struggle because we thought, what is it that really allows us to be able to speak to any of this? Because we have the same, shortcomings and the same mistakes that anybody else has. And then we realized it was just the grace that God's poured into our lives. He wants us to be able to share that with others. We've been married now this summer. It'll be 34 years. And so,
wow, congratulations.
It's just one of those things. Well, she probably deserves sympathy. I deserve congratulations. But it's one of those things where, we really struggled for a while with because we were so blessed with so many good things happening in our marriage. The big question was why would anybody listen to what we have to say? And then God showed us that as he pours into us, he wants us to be able to share that with others.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And so a little bit more of the introduction. We do the Vision Driven Marriage podcast together. And that was fun to get that started because we had not had an opportunity to share a stage very much together. Occasionally we spoke at, we have a Solidify Your Marriage conference that we do. And so we've shared the stage there like in person, and then COVID hit and where it goes from there. Right.
Yes.
And so being behind the microphone together has kind of created this whole new dance that we're learning how to do together. And so, but God laid it on our heart and we said, okay, I guess this is what we do next.
There you go. Well, I love the vision-driven marriage. I love that because one, I know for me, I was lacking vision, not just as a husband, just as a man.
Yeah.
And I was, we've learned if we don't have any goals, if we don't have any direction, we're going to end up somewhere, So where are we going to end up? And I want to have a little say in where I end up. And so, being more intentional, name of our podcast, with life. And that has really changed everything in the last several years of our life because that intentionality is so important. But I realize too that my vision And the things I was worried about, my wife was dying for me to do. I didn't think I was worthy enough to lead her. If that's what she desired the most, was for me to be the leader in our house, not to be the guy who says what to do and this and that, but to show vision and to pray with her. I couldn't even pray with my wife. I didn't pray with my wife for years. And now that's
common struggle.
Yes, because how vulnerable is that, right?
And we were there too. I mean, we didn't pray together for many years, and not until probably in the last, I'd say probably in the last 7 or 8 years, probably. Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of it is because it's so easy for us to feel like I might not do it quite right. And then if one thing goes sideways, instead of looking at it as an opportunity to be able to meet a challenge, we look at it as a failure. And, too often we back off when we're met with a challenge. And, I love the fact that intentional is not only the name of your podcast, The Intentional Guy, but also that intentional is the concept you keep bringing up, because it's also what God's spoken to us. That's the whole idea behind being vision driven.
Yeah. Being intentional.
Well, I appreciate you guys coming on here and giving us some information that would help us. Let's jump over to the 6 marriage mistakes you make as soon as you open your mouth, and how I want to hear how to avoid them.
don't we all? And so one of the things we do want to share with your listeners is that Leslie and I have the opportunity to be able to look at this from a couple of different perspectives. The obvious one, I'm looking at it as a man, she's looking at it as a woman, and all of us realize that we are very different. We can get to the same place, but the way we go about it often doesn't look the same. And, it's one of the things that attracts us to our spouse in the first place. And then it can lead us to really be frustrated by our spouse later on. And so, as we look at this, she's going to be able to bring a perspective, though, that has a lot to do with counseling, has a lot to do with the opportunity to help your not only your emotional wellness, but your spiritual wellness. And the perspective that I'll bring most of the time is the perspective of a pastor. I love to see what God's intention is and what God's word says. And so we'll be sharing a little bit of both of those perspectives today.
So let's jump in.
All right.
Our first one, the first thing not to say to your spouse is, what's wrong with you? Because that is such a confrontational and accusatory statement that it just immediately shuts down conversation. And not only does it shut down conversation, but it undermines the connection. And, when you're talking about being intentional in your relationship, it's that intentionality is what's going to build up a connection with your spouse, connection in that relationship. And so many times the words that come out of your mouth are the things that can just tear that down. Right.
Yeah.
And so that first thing is, what's wrong with you,
or anything that means that, because it's okay for us to evaluate a situation and realize that that perspective doesn't seem to make sense. But instead of looking at it from what's wrong with you perspective, that shuts down communication. Instead, we need to be really inquisitive and start finding out what's going on, because what we probably meant, instead of what's wrong with you, is why are you reacting this way? This doesn't make sense. And so if we ask the question with a little more intentionality, a little more specificity, we're able to get some answers instead of getting a shutdown.
And if you start that whole conversation with, this doesn't make sense, like Doug was saying, then that tells your spouse the position that you're in with, I'm not understanding you,
Right.
So,
because with you saying what's wrong with you, it has a tone to it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it does.
My wife doesn't do tone very well.
I give it. I don't take it very well.
But I like that.
And one of the other things is when you say something like what's wrong with you, there's also an implication that there's a right way to do this, and you have failed.
And you failed. So when it's coming from the wife's point of view, to the husband's point of view, it would trigger that it's a failure, when they're trying so hard not to be a failure, like they don't, that's not ever a husband's intention in their lives to be a failure for their wife. But man, that conveys that sentiment, what's wrong with you? Like, you just screwed this all up,
Leslie, can I ask you real quick? Do you think, that's me. Are most men that way? They're worried about being a failure with their wife?
Yeah.
Do you think that's one of our common fears?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, Doug would be better off to speak to that, but I've seen that a lot in the counseling office. But, one of the things that I didn't realize early on in our marriage was that he had that fear too, but because of his personality and his leadership skills and just the way the dynamic in our relationship went, I didn't realize that he struggled with that. Like that was kind of a hidden part of him. And I didn't learn that about him until, a lot later. And I've never thought that he was a failure. I mean, even when, there were some things that, early on in our marriage, I mean, we haven't done everything right. There's been times where things get kind of messed up, but I have never thought that he was a failure, And if I maybe knew that was something that he was thinking about or struggling with, I would have been able to speak positive things into that for him.
But see, that's something, Michael, that I think that when you expressed that you deal with that, I think a lot of men do, but for different reasons. One man will have a different motivator why he feels that way than another. But I think one of the common threads is we've been given a gift to be able to be responsible for the people we love. Mm-hmm. And, that's not very popular today because, and it's not because our wives can't do pretty much everything for themselves. Of course they can. We've been blessed with wives who are intelligent and capable and can do all these things for themselves. But we've been given the responsibility by God to take care of the people we love. Yeah. And I think that responsibility causes us to feel like a failure if we think we haven't loved them properly. And so with this first of the 6 things, the what's wrong with you statement, as soon as you say it, you've kind of messed up. It goes back to a concept that's really misunderstood right now, because we know that God has commanded us as husbands to love our wives the way Christ loved the church. And we feel that responsibility, whether we can put words to it or not. We feel that weight. Yeah. And so we want to be able to love our wives well. We want to be able to, to be obedient to that call even before we can put words to what it looks like. And so, we want to encourage you, rather than saying something that would make her feel unloved, to be able instead to ask questions so that she knows she's valued. Then you're able to still get to the root of the matter. What's going on? This doesn't look like you. This isn't something that you would normally do,
or something I don't
but
understand.
She would feel loved instead of unloved, and eliminates that opportunity for us to feel like we failed. But for the ladies, often they get the same opportunity, though, as they speak to their husbands, they can make them feel disrespected.
Yes. Yeah. That would, because that is a very disrespectful, what's wrong with you in the tone. That's a very disrespectful kind of way to come across in that. Absolutely.
And all you're going to do is put walls up on each side. Me and my wife are really good with walls, and so that you're not what you're trying to accomplish. Are you getting what you're trying to accomplish? Probably not.
Right. And so ultimately it comes down to how can we be more obedient to that call that God's placed in our lives in Ephesians 5, where husbands are supposed to love their wives and wives are supposed to show respect to their husbands. And so I guess the question is, can I find out what's going on in a way that is loving to my spouse, or ladies, a way that respects my husband, instead of shutting them down because they feel unloved or feel disrespected?
Yeah. Great. Well, how about 2?
Well, number 2, something that you shouldn't say, or that's a mistake if you let it come out of your mouth, right, is you're always so lazy.
Or it's any statement that's always or never is basically it. We're just giving one example, but anytime you say you always or you never, chances are that's not true.
Because generally always and right, always and never. You just shouldn't. You should always never say that. How's that? You should just not.
Yes.
Generally sweeping generalizations are something that if you realize that that's something that you're doing, it's you just take a step back and say, okay, why is this a general statement? And, why do I feel the need to have this sweeping generalization? And it may be because whatever was said, there's something underlying that can't be said. You're not able, like, for instance, we'll use the example, you're always so lazy. Mm-hmm. I have seen wives say that to their men, and, of course, into the counseling office for, marriage counseling or whatever. But what the underlying thing is that she could have said, instead of "you're always so lazy," is "I feel unimportant or unvalued because you won't do what you say you'll do." In whatever it is, I fix the garage door, change the oil in the car, right. whatever it was. If he said, "I'll do that," just to get her to be quiet, and then it has to become louder, or it has to become an always or a never statement, because it's not then just about the issue that's been said.
And the reason that becomes so dangerous, we're sharing again from the counseling perspective, whether it's the pastoral counseling or in her counseling office.
Yeah, because we never talk to each other like that.
Always. But what we hear is we hear people say things like, "You're never on time," or "You always are selfish," or "You're always lazy." And what that does, what we've discovered, is that will cause the spouse who hears, "You're never on time," that's something that she thinks is unredeemable about me. Mm-hmm. Or "You're always, you're always so lazy." That's just the character trait. That's who she thinks I am. So there's no fixing it. What that does is that causes such a barrier in relationship. It does two things. The first thing it does is the spouse that hears that feels that is their identity. And the second thing that it does is the spouse that says those things starts to believe that their spouse is irredeemable, and it drives a wedge in the relationship when the focus needs to be intimacy. God desperately wants us to become more and more intimate with our spouse rather than having things come between us.
Yeah. And that is so, to say that is so defeating. Yeah. That it can knock the wind, especially men, it can knock the wind out of us, that we feel like, and then get paralyzed in it. And this is something common I hear a lot, what you just brought up with couples. And a lot of it is because, like you said, the man said, "I will take care of this." Like, right. I know, like, the finances, "I will take over this, I will do this," but then never follows through with doing it. But the underlying thing is he doesn't feel he's good enough to do that. And then the more we say this, the more he feels that way. So the more we go down into that rabbit hole and don't come out of it.
Right.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. And the thing is that vicious cycle downward, that spiral downward, can so quickly be changed to a spiral upward with just a different choice of words.
Because we think that communicating is just saying words, but you can say words without actually listening and working through a circumstance. A communication, but especially in your marriage, communication is going to be sharing what's going on, listening to what's being said, and asking questions so that you become people who are on the same page.
The problem is with most people in communication, they're not listening. They're thinking about what they're going to say next, instead of listening to the other person. And I am terrible about that.
Especially when we're frustrated.
Oh yeah, especially when we're frustrated. I've taught many clients in the counseling office how to reflective listen, so that the person that they're talking to knows that they're listening to them and that they have heard twice than what that person has said, because they're reflecting it back to them. So they've heard it once when they heard it, and they're hearing it again as they say it back.
Yes, because the truth is, what I was thinking I was hearing, what my wife was saying was not at all what she was saying to me.
Right.
We've had that.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, we have that happen. And usually it's him to me, because there's social cues and things that are going on, or time is an issue too. Like our morning routine is so very quick. We see each other maybe 5 minutes of a morning before he leaves for work. And it's catching those things during that time, so there's a lot of nuances to communication. And there are times when you hear what's not said, or assume what's not said. Yeah.
Well, that's a whole different issue, is the assuming wrongly. That's something that we would encourage people to also check out. That's probably not for today, but the third statement, that's one that we really need to make sure we stay away from, is anything that means, well, that's not the way I would have done it.
Yeah, because that just belittles your spouse and their efforts on whatever it is that they had just put into it. And it really can be harmful if your spouse's love language is acts of service, and they have just performed an act of service, and along comes the spouse and it's like, well, that's not how I would have done it, and it's like, I'd be, my love language is not acts of service, but I can imagine that I would have been crushed if that had played out in our marriage at any time.
Well, of course. I mean, that would deflate me. Okay.
Yes.
Because it's telling me you did it all wrong. That's what I'm hearing, and then I feel like I just put all this effort into doing this for you, and it's not appreciated.
Right. And the real thing that's going to be important for every one of the listeners to hear is, whenever you develop a new habit, regardless of what the new habit is, there's going to be times where you are growing in small stages. So you're going to be doing it a little bit wrong before you do it right. And something like, that's not the way I would have done it, can stop the progress and just kill it.
I've seen this play out too, not just as acts of service, or like a behavior or doing something, but also in decision-making skills. And a lot of times it plays out like that's how it plays out from a wife to a husband. A husband makes a decision, and that's his place. He's the leader of the family. So he has made this decision, and the wife says, that's not how I'd have done it. And there it goes. It's gone south, or that has belittled his decision on how he would have done it. And there's several ways that can be corrected. One is to be talking about how to make that decision ahead of time. Like, one spouse just not making that decision on their own, but both of them talking about the pros and cons of, each of the decisions that could be made, how that situation could go, so that they know that they're on the same page when the husband does make that decision.
Well, and that, again, a lot of this comes down to real communication instead of just talking at each other. Right. But this gives us an opportunity, instead of saying, well, that's not the way that I would have done it. One of the things that we are still learning, but we're really grateful that we've learned a lot in the process, is to make sure that we talk things through. There are decisions that are mine to make. But I have conversations with her, not only because I value her opinion and want to know if the things that I'm getting ready to do make sense, but then I can also find out if there's a place where I can truly help her in any way. If there's something that would cause her fear and anxiety, and there's a second choice that's equally valid for me. If I'm deciding between two that I think are both equally good, and I hear that one of them causes her fear or anxiety, by talking about it first, I'm able to make a better decision. She didn't make the decision for me, but I found out this is best for us. And so when we look at those types of things, this gives us an opportunity, instead of saying that's not the way I would have done it, to talk to each other, to become each other's most trusted advisor, to encourage one another. But then also, this gives us the opportunity to practice coming alongside one another. God's given us the privilege. He sees us as one, and being able to come alongside each other. Everybody stumbles a little bit. When your spouse is beside you, you don't fall all the way down. You just bump into them a little bit and they help you stay up. And that's kind of what this looks like.
Yeah, it creates a trust factor that is important in a marriage, because I can like he's acting trustworthily. Is that a word? Yeah.
You got it now.
Yeah. Trustworthily, and so the consequence of that is that I learn I can trust him in the decisions that he's making, because I know that he's considering what's best for me in the decisions that he's making. So that creates a trust in the relationship that it goes a long way in solidifying our marriage.
It does, but it's something that takes a very long time to create and then maintain, and it only takes one really bad decision to cause it to crumble. But we get to hear people say, my wife should trust me, and the question that often gets asked is, are you acting in a way that's trustworthy? Yeah. And so for men, if you want to be intentional, I want to be intentional, and one of the things that I need to remember to do is to act in a way that's trustworthy. When I do that, then it's legitimate for me to pray that my wife would trust me. Yep. But it needs to start with that question within ourselves: are we acting in a way that's trustworthy?
And I think it's an attitude. When I'm hearing this, I think it's an attitude with my wife and then she can trust me with it a lot better, But of course, all that's the way you present something. Let's be honest.
It is
as well. And like you said, it takes time, because I think part of the problem is maturity. Yeah. In some ways, as we get older, hopefully we get better with these things. But honestly, a lot of these we've all been guilty of doing, especially probably in the first part of our marriage.
Oh yeah.
Right.
As we're really getting to know the other person, but also get past looking at us and seeing our spouse for who they are, being able to see them, not just be with them, but see them and what matters to them and what's important to them. So,
right.
So let's go to number 4.
All right, I'll go ahead and take number 4. I'll let Leslie take number 5. Number 4, don't say something that implies stop being so emotional.
And don't say stop being so emotional.
Don't say stop being so emotional. Because one of the things that we talked about earlier, there are differences between men and women. And one of the things that has been difficult for a lot of us as men is not being able to fully process one of the main differences. Men tend, not always, there's always exceptions, men tend to be problem solvers who think it through, and then maybe later will feel something about it. But we want to get in and fix it. Ladies tend, of course, with the same number of exceptions, ladies tend to feel a certain way about something, which then dictates the way that they will choose to solve the problem. So they'll feel about it first, then they'll think it through. We tend to think about it first, then maybe we'll feel something about it. And as a result, it can lead to a real problem. That difference is a beautiful thing, but if all we do is say, you're just being emotional, we're discounting the process.
Yeah, I think that discounting the process is huge, because when you say something like that to somebody, whether it's husbands saying that to their wives or wives saying that to their husbands, it literally invalidates that genuine emotion that person is feeling. Like, that emotion is real, yes. What they're feeling is real. It may be inconsequential in the big picture. It may be the word that I use in the counseling office is illegitimate. It may be due to internal factors that don't match the circumstance. But regardless of what it is, it may be genuine to the circumstance too. But regardless of what it is, the other spouse coming alongside and invalidating those feelings just undermines the connection of the relationship. And if you're working to be intentional in your relationship, like, that connection should be a very big priority, whether you agree with what the emotions are or not.
That's the key. So men, let me go ahead and speak to you on this category. You might not ever feel what your wife is feeling, but it doesn't mean that what she's feeling, therefore, doesn't have value or merit. Even after it's all done, you might not at all feel any of the things she felt.
Yeah.
But
and you don't have to understand it.
But when you dismiss it, then you're not able to actually be what you're so desperately wanting to be. Because what is it we almost always want to be? We want to be the ones that fix it. We want to be the knight in shining armor, rides in and fixes it. We're ready to kill some dragons. We're ready to make things better because we love our spouse. But when we invalidate those emotions, what we're saying, and what we don't mean to do, we're thinking, I don't feel that way. And so we blow it off. What we need to do is acknowledge it, understanding we might not ever feel the way she does. And that's okay.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah. Because in the end, there have been times I'm like not understanding my wife. Okay. I'm not understanding what we're just talking about, this emotion and feeling she's having, but it's very real to her.
Right.
And if I am dismissive of that with her, it's breaking our relationship. It's taking us backwards, not forward, because then it goes back to that other and 3, what we were talking about, trust.
Yeah.
Trusting, it's breaking some of that there. And then by also saying that, I'm hurting her, and I don't want to hurt my wife, right. And sometimes I think as men, we get frustrated when we can't fix it.
Yes.
We learned early on. Yeah, we learned early on in our marriage that Doug needed to ask me, do you need me to fix it or do you just need me to listen?
Because I'm not wired to listen.
I just learned that, Doug. I just learned that. And right. That is a great point.
It's a game changer, isn't it?
It is. Because now I don't have to worry about what I have to do at this moment. Right. All I have to do at this moment is she needs someone to talk to.
And see, isn't it great that we've discovered, because I discovered the same thing. If she'll let me know, I don't need you to fix this. I need to tell you about my day because you're the person who's most important in my life. I need to tell you about it. I don't need you to fix it. And I'm probably going to cry. If she can tell me that ahead of time, I'm good with that. I can do that because now I know how I can make it better, because what is it that drives that I want to fix it? We're trying to make it better.
Right.
Well, if all it takes to make it better is to truly listen and not try to solve the problem, I've just made it better. That's what I want to do. She's just told me how.
Yes, she did. And if you're like me, I don't like to see my wife cry.
No.
So if I don't have this knowledge up front and I want to go hurt somebody, So it's a great lesson to learn and to be able to communicate to one another.
Right. So if any of you ladies are watching this with your husbands right now, or if you're watching it by yourself, even, you can be such a valuable help to your husband if you will just slow down to tell him, I just need you to listen. I love your heart that wants to fix it. I don't need you to fix this. That will help us more than I can tell you, ladies.
Or I just need you to fix this because I'm emotionally spent. I can't do anything else right now. Like, I need you to fix this.
That's good knowledge too.
Yeah, just step in and fix it.
Yeah.
So but that's all basic communication.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome right there. So number 5.
Mm-hmm.
Number 5, and I am going to stereotype here a little bit, but this is probably mostly for the women. Okay. But it totally stereotypes. So women, forgive me. So, but number 5 is, I told you so. Right. And that's usually, stereotypically, that's something that the wives say. Right. Mm-hmm. But that I told you so comes across with a tone of inferiority. And if your husband or the husband in the situation has an inferiority complex, they're already feeling inferior, like that's just hammering it home. And it's just not a good place. It totally undermines the relationship. It undermines the connection. And it's never, here we're using the word never. I will say never. It is never a good idea to keep score. And that's kind of what this does, is if you're keeping score in your relationship, then that I told you so is a 1-up and I just gained a point over you kind of attitude. And it just really undermines the connection in the relationship.
And me as a husband, I feel like I'm a failure.
Right.
Yeah.
So I failed. is what I did in that comment. And that it's defeating.
Yeah, it's defeating.
Well, and the whole purpose is for us to be able to do things that will draw us closer, more intimate. This does exactly the opposite of that. And there are, let's just go ahead and share this out loud. There are times where you had a disagreement with your spouse, and the idea that you had was what ended up happening. Okay. So there are times where I told you so would be truthful, but there's not a time when I told you so is helpful.
Right?
That's the thing. I want to make sure that the audience.
Okay. That's good.
Because there are times where you were right.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we get the privilege to be each other's helpmates. And is it going to help your spouse when you're like, I told you so?
Right.
It's not going to help them.
The fix there is to come in with some humility, the humility that we're called to before the Lord, and to be able to say, you were right. And I appreciate the fact that, you understood how to do it, or X, Y, whatever XYZ is, but to come in with some humility there and just saying, oh, I'm glad that you were right. I was wrong. My way wouldn't have worked,
Easy to say, really hard to do.
Really hard to do.
We're just telling you right now, that one's hard to do, but it's something that is going to help your marriage if you're ever able to do that.
Right. Well, I'll be honest. All these are really easy when you look at, but there are behaviors that are hard to change when you are so used to doing life that way.
Right.
So.
Well, and the last one that we wanted to look at today is one that we see too often. It may not be these words, but we see the idea played out way too often. You want to share what the phrase is?
Sure. Yes. The phrase puts a conditionality. Is that a word too? I'm short on my words today. A conditionality on the behavior in a relationship. And that's, if you loved me, you would. Whatever you would do, right? If you loved me, you would do this or that or XYZ or whatever. If you loved me, you would. And that puts such a condition on the relationship that it I don't know, it's a relationship killer. It just,
and there's a couple of reasons.
I think so. I agree. I think that's the least healthy of all these that you've mentioned.
Yeah.
That right there is
because it's manipulative.
That's the key. It's manipulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
And God doesn't take kindly to manipulation. In fact, he equates it to witchcraft in the Bible.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good right there.
And we see men and women both do this. If you loved me, you would do whatever to try to control, and they don't even realize they're trying to control some of the time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I totally agree. And I wish, as people are listening to this, to ask them to be honest with yourself if you do any of these, because we have the ability to change. One of the things, and I won't get into it long, but I'll tell you shortly, I'm using your words, how this went was a friend of mine approached me over how I teased my wife when we went out to dinner. And at first, I didn't like what he said, kind of put my walls up. But then I was like, it's a good friend. My wife has been even saying, I just don't listen. I started doing it, and I changed my behavior. And it didn't take very long that I saw a difference in my wife and how she responded back to me. And then I saw walls going. I didn't realize I was putting her walls up, And ever since we've done that, it's kind of changed how we're communicating to one another, because this is the woman I love. So let's have an intentionality to this. I love her. So if I truly love her, I need to be selfless, and I need to quit thinking about myself and thinking about her needs.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping she's doing the same back. Right. But we are. And in that, then we're communicating better, and we see each other for as individuals who we are. That makes us better together. Then, in that intimacy you talked about earlier, how important learning these things builds intimacy with one another.
Right. And one of the things we've discovered is that Satan loves nothing more than to drive a wedge in any relationship. But he loves to destroy marriage relationships, just absolutely loves it. And he uses the same lies that he tried to use when he used when he tried to tempt Jesus. Because, Jesus, as the Son of God, when he was tempted in the desert, he was trying to tempt him with, just, worship me and I'll give you all the land you see. We already owned it all, throw yourself down, and call the angels to save yourself. All those things that he was tempting him with basically were saying, you know who you are. You deserve to be rescued. You deserve all of these things. And that same lie is shared with us because Satan would love to tempt you to say you deserve better treatment in this marriage. You deserve something more. And so, to try to control that, you say, well, if you loved me the right way, you'd do this for me, or you would say this, or you'd change here. And looking at it that way is looking at marriage in a contractual agreement. God says marriage is a covenant, not a contract. And so the fix is being able to love in a covenant way. There's several different ways we explain that. You have to start with yourself. You got to clean up your own side of the street. But Leslie, what are the things that are most important to you about living in a covenant way? And then I'll share a couple of the things that are important to me.
Well, Michael, I think you hit it right on the head when you said that the behaviors that you changed started bringing down your wife's walls. That's the first thing in a covenant relationship, is that we have to realize that our behavior is the only behavior that we have control over. Yeah. And it is influential when we're in a relationship. Like, you changed your behavior for the better, and it affected your whole relationship, your whole household. Right. But you chose to do that. And that wasn't like you pointing the finger and saying, okay, well, I'll clean up my side of the street if you clean up your side of the street. That's kind of what we talk about. But you started seeing her behavior change because you changed your behavior. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in a contractual relationship. Well, he's not going to do this, or I have to do this, and he's not going to be able to do anything. That sort of, I'll scratch my back if you scratch your back, or you have to scratch my back first before I'm going to do anything. And that's not the way God has intended for it to be. He's intended for us to be in a covenant relationship, which looks a lot like what you can explain.
The big difference, as Leslie was talking about with the contract, too often people look at their marriage and they think, I'll do what I promised I would do, but only if you hold up your end of the bargain. If you let me down, then I'm released from my obligations to do things for you. And we see marriages struggle. We even see marriages fall apart under that kind of contract thinking. God calls a marriage a covenant, and he shows us what a covenant relationship looks like. Here's the basic difference. In a covenant, I will do what I promised I would do just because I promised. Not because you held up your end of the bargain or not because you're making me happy or not because you're doing the right things. I promised I would, so I will. And that's it. Where in a contract, if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, I don't have to do what I said I would do anymore. If I hire you to put a fence around my yard and you only complete two sides of it, I don't have to pay you.
Right.
But too many people try to think that their marriage can operate under those same types of contractual law, where God says it's a covenant. And he demonstrated to us what it looks like. I'm so grateful that God relates to me in a covenant rather than what I deserve, because I don't deserve the grace he gives. I don't deserve the mercy he gives or the love. And so I'm thankful for covenant relationship.
Yeah. I love that, because I can think of all these people who I've talked to who watch the podcast, and friends and things like that we struggle. And I think it's because we're not seen as a covenant with one another. We are seen it as a contract, and I don't know how many times I heard, and even in my own life, I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, there's been times I behaved that way in it, and you're not going to get the results you want from that, No. So if we can intentionally change how we think and see these things, it's really going to benefit our marriage and what we're doing. And as intentional guy, as we have husbands listening to this right now, as a husband, I like what you said earlier. We can't change what someone else does, right? But I am responsible for what I do. Mm-hmm. And so where do I need change at in my life? And listening to this podcast today, is there areas that I can change? I bet it's easy to sit here, and I bet some people have looked at it and go, yep, she does this. Yep, she does that. It's easy to point at other people and see what they do wrong, right? Mm-hmm. But it's hard sometimes to look at where I'm failing, where I'm lacking in, and can be better. But if we can do that, and we can change that. Let me tell you, you said it earlier. My wife and my relationship became better, and my family life became better. It blossomed past just me and my wife's relationship, but even to our kids, as well.
And that's because God honors. I mean, when we attempt to do things in a godly way, God honors that. And we're not perfect. We're going to mess up at times, but God honors those efforts.
That's right. That's right. Well, listen, thank you so much for being on here today. And I love this. Gives us a lot of food for thought today, a lot of things, a lot of takeaways here for people. But before we close, I want you guys to talk about your podcast and your ministry with us and where we can find out. I will put stuff in the description below, but I would love for you to just speak on that for a few moments.
Sure. Well, we launched not too long ago, the Vision Driven Marriage Podcast. And we launched that out of a dream of really being intentional with a vision in our marriage, because God doesn't intend for marriages to not thrive. I mean, God intends marriage to thrive, right?
Right.
And he gives us a vision, and he gives us the ways in which that we are supposed to do that. And so we launched the Vision Driven Marriage Podcast, and that can be found where you subscribe to any podcast. I mean, it's on all of the players. And so you can find us there, and you can also find us over at drawing a blank. I hate when that happens. heartcallministries.org. There we go. I do that every now and then. It's like a brain fart.
I know.
But yeah. And so heartcallministries.org is our website, and you can find a lot of free resources on the website.
And if you want a little more information that's kind of related to what we were talking about today, we're going to have a PDF available on heartcallministries.org about some of the arrogant marriage mistakes that you can make and how you can avoid those. And so if anybody's interested, we'd encourage you to go to heartcallministries.org to check that out. Yeah. And every Friday, a new episode drops for our podcast, and we interview folks kind of like you do, but then we follow it up for the next 3 weeks with a teaching about whatever they talked about. We try to get spiritual application. So we try to break it down into, we're trying to make this where it's as simple as God says his word is. He says it's simple enough that a child can understand it. We're trying to make sure that we don't convolute it with the things. We just share God's word, and here's how you can do that.
And so this is every Friday it comes on?
Yeah. Every Friday a new episode drops.
It drops at like 4 a.m.
Gotcha. Great. So
unless you're going
on the way to work, I love to listen to podcasts and things like that. And while I'm at work, And
unless you're going to the gym at like 3 a.m., then you won't miss it.
Yeah, that's not me.
That's not me either.
Well, again, thank you guys both for being here. Thank you for sharing and being really authentic and open with us on this. And to my listeners, I hope you will go check out in the descriptions, go look at these, and especially for added resources in our life. And until next week, just keep being intentional. We'll talk to you later. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Intentional Guy Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and got some real value out of it. Tell others what you learned and share the podcast if you think they would benefit from it too. Please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, leave a review, and consider checking out our website, intentionalguy.org, to learn more about us and get in touch. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.